There is a book that finds you, not one you search for, not one you stumble across by accident, though it will feel exactly like an accident when it happens. A book that arrives in your life at a precise moment, a moment that, looking back, you will recognize was not random at all. A moment that was, in some sense, you cannot yet fully articulate, inevitable. You may have already experienced this. A title appearing in your peripheral vision at exactly the right time. A recommendation from someone who had no way of knowing what you were quietly wrestling with. A book falling from a shelf, literally falling, and opening to a page that answered a question you had never spoken out loud. You dismissed it as coincidence. You filed it under strange timing. You moved on, but something in you didn't move on. Something in you paused at that moment and felt, beneath the surface of the coincidence, a current of something deeper, something that felt less like accident and more like recognition. That feeling was not imagination. That feeling was your monad beginning to stir. And what I want to show you today, what we are going to excavate together through every layer of what you think you know about books, about consciousness, about the hidden structure of reality itself, is why that feeling was accurate. Why the book that found you for a reason that goes far deeper than psychology, far deeper than synchronicity as you currently understand it, and reaches all the way down to the quantum substrate of reality, where the ancient ones said the deepest truths were always waiting. Because here is what most people stop at when they encounter this idea. They stop at the metaphor. They hear, the right book finds you at the right time, and they nod, and they think, yes, that's a beautiful way of putting it, and they move on. They stay at the surface. They accept the poetic version and never look at what's actually happening beneath it. We don't stop at the surface here. What you are about to see beneath that surface will make it impossible to look at a book, at any book, the same way again. And more than that, it will make it impossible to look at yourself the same way, because what the book is responding to when it finds you is something in you that most people spend their entire lives never discovering they have. Something called the monad, and it is activating now. Let's begin at the surface. Let's start with what you think you know. You know what a book is. A physical object, paper and ink and binding, or, in the modern version, pixels on a screen, text rendered by a device, information encoded in language, transmitted from a writer's mind to a reader's mind across time and space. That's the surface understanding. That's what everyone knows. And it's not wrong. It's just the thinnest outer layer of what a book actually is. Peel back that understanding and look at what's underneath. A book is not just information. A book is a field. Every serious reader has felt this without being able to explain it. The way certain books have a presence, an atmosphere, a quality that exists before you've read a single word. You hold the book and something happens, something shifts. The information hasn't transferred yet. The language hasn't entered your mind yet, but something is already happening between you and this object. What is that? What is that quality that exists before the reading begins? That is the field of the book, and it is not metaphor, It is not poetic language for a psychological phenomenon. It is something that quantum mechanics, ancient philosophy, and the deepest traditions of human wisdom have all, in their different languages, been trying to describe for thousands of years. But there's a layer beneath that, because before we can understand what the book's field is, we need to understand what you are, not the surface version of what you are, not the psychological, biographical, sociological version, the version that exists beneath all of those layers, the version that the book is actually responding to when it finds you, the monad. This word comes from the Greek monos, meaning alone, singular, indivisible, and it was used by philosophers across centuries, across traditions, across cultures, to describe something they all kept independently arriving at. The idea that beneath the composite, layered, constructed self that you experience as you, there is a unit of consciousness so fundamental, so irreducible, so singular, that it cannot be broken down further. The monad is not your personality. It is not your memories. It is not your beliefs or your preferences or your psychological patterns. All of those are surface layers, extraordinarily complex surface layers, yes, but surface layers nonetheless. The monad is what exists beneath all of them. The monad is the point of pure awareness from which all those layers extend outward, like layers of an onion growing from a single seed. And here is what the ancient ones knew, what Leibniz encoded in his mathematics, what the Pythagoreans encoded in their number mysticism, what the Vedic tradition encoded in the concept of the Atman, what the Hermetic tradition encoded in the phrase as above, so below. The monad is not passive. The monad is not a static point of awareness sitting quietly at the center of your being, waiting for life to happen to it. The monad reaches, it calls, it attracts, and when it is ready to expand into a new layer of itself, when it is ready to activate a new dimension of its own awareness, it begins to generate a field of readiness, a field of resonance, a field that, in the quantum substrate of reality, begins to interact with everything in its environment, including books. This is where the veil lifts, because what you have been calling coincidence, what you have been calling good timing, or synchronicity, or just getting lucky with a recommendation, is actually something far more precise. It is your monad, in a state of activation readiness, generating a resonance field that begins to pull toward you exactly the information, exactly the wisdom, exactly the encoded frequency that it needs to take its next step. The book doesn't find you by accident. The book finds you because your monad called it. And the reason this feels so hard to accept, the reason most people stop at beautiful metaphor and don't go deeper, is that we have been conditioned to understand ourselves as receivers, not transmitters. We have been taught that information comes to us from outside, that we are passive recipients of a world that exists independently of our observation, that the books on the shelf are just books on a shelf, waiting neutrally for whoever happens to pick them up. But quantum mechanics found something beneath the surface of that understanding that should have changed everything about how we see this. It didn't. because most people stopped at the surface explanation. Today we go beneath it. If this transmission is reaching you at the right layer, like the video and subscribe so the next one finds you the moment your monad is ready for it. In 1927, at the 5th Solvay conference in Brussels, the greatest minds in physics gathered to grapple with something that the quantum experiments of the previous decade had revealed, something so disturbing to the classical understanding of reality that many of them spent the rest of their careers trying to explain it away. What they had found in the behavior of electrons and photons and the fundamental particles of matter was this: the observer is not separate from the observed. At the quantum level, particles do not have definite properties, definite positions, definite momenta, until they are observed. Before observation, they exist in what physicists call a superposition of states, a simultaneous existence across multiple possibilities, a smear of potential spread across probability space. The act of observation, the interaction between the measuring consciousness and the quantum system, collapses that superposition into a single definite reality. This is not philosophy. This is not metaphor. This is what the mathematics of quantum mechanics predicts, and what every experiment has confirmed. But here is the layer beneath that discovery that almost no one talks about. If the observer collapses the wave function, if the act of observation determines which of the infinite possible states of a quantum system becomes real, then the observer is not passive. The observer is generative. The observer is, in a very precise and measurable sense, participating in the creation of the reality they observe. And if that is true at the level of electrons and photons, if it is true at the level of the fundamental building blocks of matter, then what does it mean at the level of the human consciousness that is doing the observing? What does it mean that you, as a conscious observer, are not simply receiving reality, but participating in generating it? What does it mean that the field of your awareness, the particular quality and frequency and readiness state of your consciousness, is not separate from the world you move through, but is in constant quantum interaction with it? It means the books on the shelf are not neutral objects waiting to be picked up. It means they exist in a field of interaction with the consciousness of every observer who moves through that space. And it means that a consciousness in a particular state of readiness, a monad in a state of activation, generates a specific kind of observational field that collapses specific possibilities into specific realities, including the reality of a particular book falling from a shelf, a particular title appearing in a peripheral glance, a particular recommendation arriving from someone who had no way of knowing. That's not belief. That's what quantum mechanics found beneath the surface of matter itself. But there's a layer beneath that. Because quantum mechanics describes the mechanism, it tells you how the interaction happens at the level of physics, but it doesn't tell you why. It doesn't tell you what it means that consciousness has this generative quality. It doesn't tell you what the monad is, in its deepest nature, and why its activation would generate this kind of field. For that, we need to go to the layer beneath quantum mechanics. We need to go to where the ancient ones were already mapping this territory thousands of years before any physicist picked up a measuring instrument. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz published his monadology in 1714. It is one of the strangest, most compressed, most layered philosophical texts ever written, 90 paragraphs, each one peeling back another layer of reality. And at the center of it is an idea so radical that 3 centuries of philosophy have not fully processed it. Leibniz said that reality is not made of matter. Reality is not made of atoms. The tiny, solid, indivisible particles that the Newtonian physics of his era was beginning to construct as the foundation of everything. Reality, Leibniz said, is made of monads, points of pure perception, units of consciousness, irreducible centers of awareness, each one reflecting the entire universe from its own unique perspective. And here is the part that most people who have heard of Leibniz stop at. They hear everything is made of consciousness, and they nod and they file it under idealist philosophy, and they move on. But peel back that understanding and look at what's underneath. Leibniz said something more specific than that. He said that monads do not interact with each other through direct contact, because they have no windows, as he put it. They are sealed units. They do not communicate through the exchange of matter or force in the way that billiard balls communicate when they collide. Instead, Leibniz said, monads interact through what he called pre-established harmony, a harmony that was built into the structure of reality from the beginning, a harmony that means every monad's unfolding, every monad's progression through its states of awareness, is perfectly synchronized with every other monad's unfolding, not because they are pushing and pulling on each other, but because they are all expressions of the same underlying unity, all playing their part in the same infinite symphony. Which means, when your monad is ready to receive a particular kind of wisdom, the monad that encoded that wisdom into a book, the monad of the author who wrote it, the monad of the tradition that shaped it, is already in harmony with yours. Not by accident, not by coincidence, by the pre-established harmony that is the deep structure of reality itself. The book finds you because the harmony was already there. You just hadn't reached the moment of activation where the harmony became perceptible. Now let's go deeper. Because Leibniz was not working in isolation, he was synthesizing something that had been mapped in different languages and different frameworks across every major wisdom tradition in human history. And when you lay those maps beside each other, something extraordinary becomes visible. They are all describing the same hidden layer. In the Vedic tradition of ancient India, the concept of the Atman describes exactly what Leibniz called the monad, the irreducible point of pure consciousness at the center of every being, identical in its deepest nature to Brahman, the infinite consciousness that is the substrate of all reality. The Upanishads, some of the oldest philosophical texts in human history, describe the Atman not as a passive witness, but as the very ground of perception itself, the awareness from which all experience arises and to which all experience returns. And the Vedic tradition had a specific understanding of what happens when the Atman is ready to expand. It begins to draw toward itself exactly the knowledge it needs. The Sanskrit concept of satsang, the company of truth, describes this precisely. The awakening consciousness doesn't seek truth so much as it generates a field that truth is drawn toward. The guru appears when the student is ready, not because the guru was waiting, but because the student's readiness generates the conditions for the guru's appearance. The book appears when the monad is ready. That's not metaphor in the Vedic framework. That is a precise description of how consciousness works at its deepest level. In the Hermetic tradition, the tradition of Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, whose teachings were encoded in the Corpus Hermeticum and preserved through centuries of mystery schools, the same understanding appears in the language of correspondence and resonance. The Hermetic axiom, as above so below, as within so without, as the universe. So the soul encodes a specific claim about the structure of reality, that the layers of existence are not separate from each other, but are reflections of each other, each layer resonating with every other layer, according to laws of correspondence that are built into the fabric of being. In the Hermetic framework, the monad, which the Hermeticists called the nous, the divine mind, is not a thing that exists inside you. It is the awareness that you are a particular expression of, and when that awareness is ready to expand into a new frequency, it draws toward itself. Through the law of correspondence, through the resonance between inner and outer, exactly the wisdom that matches its new frequency. The right book appears because the right frequency has been reached. The outer corresponds to the inner. The universe above mirrors the consciousness below. What this video is uncovering is one layer of that hidden architecture, the layer where quantum mechanics and ancient wisdom first converge. But beneath it, there are four more, each one deeper, each one more structurally transformative. I mapped the full excavation in Beneath the Veil, a quantum map of reality's hidden layers. A guide that takes you through all 5 layers from the consensus surface down to the original frequency, with practices at every depth designed to shift your awareness permanently. You'll find it in the description below. In the Kabbalistic tradition, the same hidden layer appears in the framework of the Sephirot, the 10 aspects of divine consciousness through which the infinite light of Ein Sof steps down into the manifest world. Each Sephirah is a layer of reality, a frequency of consciousness, a dimension of awareness. And the Kabbalistic path of ascent is precisely the path of moving through these layers, peeling back each one to reveal the deeper layer beneath it, until the monad, the Yeshida, the innermost spark of divine consciousness, is fully revealed. The Kabbalists had a specific teaching about the books of wisdom, that certain texts carry the light of specific Sephirot, and that a soul cannot truly receive the light of a text until it has reached the corresponding level of its own development. The text may be physically present. You may have owned it for years. But until your consciousness has reached the frequency it resonates with, it remains sealed, opaque, a surface without depth. And then something shifts, and you pick up a book you've owned for years, and it opens like it never opened before. Because you have reached the layer it was waiting for you to reach. You've experienced this. I know you have. A book you tried to read years ago and couldn't connect with. And then you return to it later, sometimes much later, and it reads like it was written for exactly who you are right now. The words haven't changed, but you have. A layer of you has activated that wasn't active before. That's not coincidence. That's the Yekida, recognizing its corresponding frequency. In the Sufi tradition of Islamic mysticism, the same understanding appears in the concept of the siyar, the secret, the innermost heart, the hidden center of the human being that is in direct relationship with the divine. The Sufi masters taught that the siyar has its own intelligence, its own knowing, its own way of drawing toward the seeker exactly what the seeker's soul needs, often through what appears to the surface mind as accident or coincidence, but is recognized by the awakened heart as divine arrangement. Rumi, the 13th century Persian poet, whose Masnavi is one of the most extraordinary books ever written, described this dynamic throughout his poetry. The reed flute crying for the reed bed from which it was cut, that is the monad, separated from its source, generating the field of longing that draws the source back toward it. The lover and the beloved finding each other across impossible distances, that is the resonance field of the activated monad, collapsing the distance between itself and what it needs. The book finds you because your soul is crying for what it contains, and that cry generates a field that reality responds to. Across traditions, across centuries, across cultures that had no contact with each other, the same hidden layer was being mapped. The monad, the Atman, the Nuz, the Yeshida, the Sir. Different words for the same irreducible truth, that at the center of every human being is a point of pure consciousness that is not separate from the consciousness that underlies all of reality, and that when this center is ready to expand, it generates a field that reality responds to with perfect precision, hidden in plain sight, mapped by every tradition, ignored by the surface understanding of who you are. I want to pause here and ask you something. Has there been a moment in your own life when something was hidden in plain sight until you were suddenly ready to see it? A truth that was always there, a pattern beneath the surface of your days that you could feel but couldn't name until the right moment. Drop it in the comments. What was the hidden layer that revealed itself when you were finally ready to look? Now let's go deeper still, because there is something specific about books, about the written transmission of wisdom, that makes them a particularly powerful medium for monadic activation. And it has to do with something that quantum mechanics and ancient wisdom both point toward, though they use completely different languages to describe it. A book is not just information. A book is a field that was generated by a consciousness in a specific state of awareness, encoded into language and preserved across time. When a mystic or a philosopher or a scientist writes from the deepest layer of their own consciousness, when they write from the place where their monad is most fully active, they are not just transmitting information, they are encoding a frequency, and that frequency does not disappear when the writing is finished. It is not lost in the translation to ink and paper. It persists. It remains encoded in the structure of the text, in the particular arrangement of the words, in the specific rhythm and resonance of the language. This is why certain books feel different from others before you've read a word. This is why you can hold a book that was written from a deep place and feel something happening before the information has transferred. You are feeling the frequency. Your monad is recognizing the resonance. The field of the text is interacting with the field of your awareness. The ancient traditions knew this explicitly. In the Jewish tradition, the Torah is not understood as a book that contains information about God. The Torah is understood as a name of God, a direct encoding of divine consciousness in language, a text whose every letter, every word, every arrangement carries a frequency that interacts with the consciousness of the reader. The study of Torah, in the deepest Kabbalistic understanding, is not an intellectual exercise. It is a frequency attunement. You are not just learning what the text says, you are being changed by what the text is. In the Hindu tradition, the Vedas are understood as Shruti, that which was heard, that which was received directly from the cosmic consciousness by the rishis in states of deep meditation. The Vedas are not human compositions. They are transmissions. And the practice of chanting Vedic mantras is not about the meaning of the words. Many practitioners chant in Sanskrit without understanding the literal meaning. It is about the frequency. The specific sound patterns of the mantras interact with the consciousness of the practitioner at a level beneath meaning, beneath language, at the level where the monad lives. In the Hermetic tradition, certain texts were understood as living, as carrying within them a consciousness that was not separate from the consciousness of the reader, but was in active relationship with it. The Emerald Tablet, the Corpus Hermeticum, the texts of the Rosicrucian tradition, these were not understood as books about mystical reality. They were understood as mystical reality encoded in text. Reading them was not a passive act of information reception. It was an active participation in the field they carried. And in the Sufi tradition, the Quran is understood not just as the word of God, but as the presence of God in language. The Sufi practice of tilawat, the melodic recitation of Quranic verses, is explicitly understood as a frequency practice, a way of allowing the divine consciousness encoded in the text to resonate with and activate the divine consciousness within the reciter. Across traditions, the book is a field, the reading is a resonance. The activation is real, but there's a layer beneath that. Because if the book is a field, if it carries an encoded frequency that was generated by a consciousness in a particular state of activation, then the question becomes, what determines whether that field can interact with the field of the reader? What determines whether the frequency of the text can resonate with the frequency of the monad? And this is where we arrive at something that both quantum mechanics and ancient wisdom describe with extraordinary precision, and that most people in the modern world have never been shown. The concept of coherence. In quantum physics, coherence refers to a specific state of a quantum system in which the different components of the system are in phase with each other, in which the wave functions of the different parts are aligned, synchronized, resonating together rather than cancelling each other out. A coherent quantum system is capable of things that an incoherent system is not. Laser light is coherent light, light in which all the photons are in phase, all moving in the same direction, all resonating together. And that coherence is what gives laser light its extraordinary power and precision. Ordinary light is incoherent. Photons moving in random directions, phases cancelling each other out. And that incoherence is why it diffuses and disperses, rather than cutting through steel. The same principle applies to consciousness. A monad in a state of incoherence, a consciousness fragmented by unprocessed emotion, by contradictory belief systems, by the noise of surface-level distraction, by the accumulated static of a life lived entirely at the surface, is like incoherent light. It diffuses, it disperses. It cannot generate a coherent field. And because it cannot generate a coherent field, it cannot effectively interact with the fields of the books, the teachings, the wisdom transmissions that are waiting to resonate with it. This is why you can read a profound book and feel nothing. This is why someone can have access to the greatest wisdom ever encoded in language and remain unchanged by it. Not because the wisdom isn't there, not because the frequency isn't being transmitted, but because the receiver is in a state of incoherence that prevents the resonance from occurring. And this is what monadic activation means. When the monad activates, when that irreducible center of consciousness begins to achieve coherence, something changes in the field it generates. The scattered, diffuse, incoherent static begins to organize itself. The different layers of the self begin to come into alignment. The surface personality, the psychological patterns, the emotional body, the intellectual framework, all of these begin to orient toward the same center. And as they do, the field that the monad generates becomes increasingly coherent. And a coherent field is a powerful field. A coherent field can interact with other coherent fields in ways that an incoherent field cannot. A coherent monad can resonate with the frequency of a book that was written from a coherent state of consciousness. The field of the text and the field of the reader begin to interact. The frequency of the encoded wisdom begins to find its corresponding frequency in the awakening consciousness, and the book finds you, not by accident, not by coincidence, by the physics of coherence interacting with the physics of resonance in a quantum field that does not recognize the separation between inner and outer that your surface mind insists upon. This is where the veil lifts. Let me tell you about a woman named Mira. She was a translator by profession, someone who spent her days moving between languages, finding the words in one tongue that carried the same meaning as the words in another. She was good at her work, precise, careful, attentive to nuance. But she had always felt, beneath the surface of her professional competence, a quiet unease, a sense that something was missing, that the words she was translating were pointing at something she couldn't quite see. That language was a surface beneath which there was a depth she hadn't reached. She had read widely. Philosophy, poetry, mysticism, science. She had read Leibniz and found him interesting. She had read the Upanishads and found them beautiful. She had read books about quantum mechanics and found them fascinating. But nothing had landed in the way she sensed something could land. Everything she read felt like it was describing something just beyond the edge of her comprehension. like she was reading maps of a country she had never visited. One afternoon, she was working late in her apartment, finishing a translation of a medieval text, a philosophical treatise that had been commissioned by a university. The work was dry, technical, difficult. She was tired, and at some point, she set down the pages she was working on and leaned back and closed her eyes. And in that moment of stillness, in that brief gap between the surface noise of her working mind and whatever was beneath it, she felt something. Something she had no words for. A kind of opening, a quality of awareness that was different from her ordinary awareness. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just deeper, like a depth that had always been there, becoming briefly perceptible. It lasted only a moment. Then the surface closed again and she was just tired in her apartment with pages to translate. But something had shifted. Something had been touched that hadn't been touched before. The next day, she went to return some books she had borrowed from a colleague. She walked through the university library on her way, as she often did, and she stopped. There was a book on a display table near the entrance. She had no idea how it got there. The library's display tables usually featured new acquisitions or seasonal recommendations, and this book looked old, worn, its cover faded, and its spine cracked with use. She didn't know who had placed it there. She didn't know why it was displayed. She didn't know anything about it. She only knew that when she saw it, something in her recognized it, not the title, though the title was in a language she could read, not the author, though she had encountered the name before without particular interest. Something beneath those surface identifiers, something in the field of the object itself, something that felt, with a certainty she couldn't explain, like recognition. She picked it up. She opened it to a random page, and she read a single paragraph. And the depth she had briefly touched the night before, the opening she had felt in the gap between her working mind and whatever lay beneath it, came flooding back. But this time it didn't close. This time it stayed open. This time the words on the page were not pointing at something just beyond the edge of her comprehension. They were meeting her exactly where she was. They were describing, in language of such precision and clarity that she felt her breath stop, exactly the quality of awareness she had touched the night before. The book had been waiting for her. Not on that display table specifically. It had been in existence for decades, had passed through many hands, had been read by many people who had found it interesting or obscure, or both. But it had been waiting for this moment. For the moment when the gap opened in Mira's surface mind, and something beneath it became briefly perceptible. For the moment when her monad, which had been quietly building toward coherence for years, through all her reading and translating, and sensing that something was just beyond her reach, finally achieved the state of activation that allowed the resonance to occur. The book found her because she was finally ready to be found. She sat down at a table in the library and read for 3 hours. She was late returning the books she had borrowed. She didn't notice. She was somewhere else, somewhere beneath the surface of the ordinary afternoon, in a depth she had been approaching for years without knowing it. That evening, she began to translate the book, not for the university, not for a commission, for herself. Because she recognized, with a certainty that needed no justification, that the work of translation, the work of finding the words in one tongue that carried the same meaning as the words in another, was exactly the work this book required. That her entire professional life had been, in some sense, preparation for this particular translation. That the monad at the center of her being had been developing precisely the skills and sensitivities that this moment required. And you have been approaching your moment. Through everything you have read and questioned and sensed and sought. Through every book that interested you and every book that left you cold. Through every moment of quiet in which something beneath the surface became briefly perceptible. Through every feeling that there was more beneath what you were looking at. Your monad has been building toward coherence, and something in you that arrived here today knew it. Now I want you to do something. Not think about something. Do something. Find an object near you. It doesn't need to be a book, though a book would be appropriate. Any object that is near you right now. A cup, a piece of paper, your own hand. Look at it. Really look at it. Allow your gaze to settle on its surface. Now, beneath the surface of what you see, there are atoms. You know this intellectually, but I want you to actually feel it. To let your awareness drop beneath the visual surface and sense the layer beneath it. The layer of molecular structure, the layer of atomic activity, the constant motion, the constant vibration, the constant quantum activity that is happening beneath the stillness of the surface. And beneath the atoms, there are electrons. And those electrons are not solid objects. They are probability distributions. They are fields of potential that exist in superposition until observed. They are, at the quantum level, not things at all. They are patterns of possibility, waves of potential, fields of interaction. Beneath the solid surface of the object you're looking at, there is mostly empty space, mostly field, mostly potential. The solidity is a surface phenomenon. The depth is quantum. Now, allow your awareness to turn inward, the same way you just directed your attention beneath the surface of the object. Direct it beneath the surface of the awareness that is doing the looking, beneath the thoughts, beneath the sensations, beneath the sense of being a particular person in a particular place at a particular time. What is there? There is awareness itself, pure, undivided, not belonging to any particular perspective, though it is currently being expressed through yours, not located in any particular place, though it is currently appearing to be located where you are. This is the monad, not a concept, not a philosophical idea. The actual irreducible point of pure consciousness that you are, beneath all the layers you have mistaken for yourself. Feel it, even briefly, even as a flicker of recognition. That flicker is the activation beginning, and the reason it matters, The reason I'm asking you to feel it rather than just understand it is that the activation of the monad is not an intellectual event. It is not something that happens because you have learned the right information. It is something that happens because awareness has turned toward its own source, because the consciousness that has been looking outward at the surface of the world has turned inward and begun to look at the depth of itself. The books that find you when your monad is activating are not bringing you information you didn't have. They are bringing you recognition of what you already are. They are holding up a mirror at the exact depth that your awareness has reached. And when you see yourself reflected at that depth, when the frequency of the text meets the frequency of your awakening consciousness, something happens that is irreversible. You cannot go back to the surface after you have seen the depth. This is what the wisdom traditions meant when they spoke of initiation. Not a ceremony, not a ritual. Those ceremonies and rituals were used to mark and facilitate it. An actual, irreversible shift in the level of reality from which consciousness operates. A permanent deepening of the point from which you perceive. The Hermetic tradition called it the second birth. The Vedic tradition called it the beginning of the path of jnana, of wisdom. The Kabbalistic tradition called it the opening of the higher Sephirot. The Sufi tradition called it the awakening of the heart. The Buddhist tradition called it the first glimpse of Rigpa, of pure awareness. Different maps, same territory. The territory of the monad beginning to know itself. And the books that appear at this moment, the texts that find you when the activation begins, are not random. They are precisely calibrated to the frequency of your particular monad, in its particular state of activation, at its particular stage of development. Because the pre-established harmony that Leibniz described, the deep resonance between all monads that is built into the structure of reality, means that the wisdom encoded by one monad in its own state of activation is always in harmony with the monad that is ready to receive it. The teacher and the student are in harmony before they meet. The book and the reader are in resonance before the reading begins. The wisdom and the seeker are already connected by the thread of the monad's pre-established harmony. You just need to reach the moment of activation for the connection to become perceptible. But there's a layer beneath that. Because we have been talking about the monad as if it is a static thing, a point of consciousness that either is or isn't activated, either is or isn't coherent. But the ancient traditions were unanimous in describing the monad's activation as a process, a progressive unfoldment, a series of layers, each one revealing a deeper layer beneath it. Leibniz described it in terms of the monad's progression through increasingly clear states of perception, from the confused, dim perception of the most primitive monads, through the more distinct perception of conscious beings, toward the fully clear and distinct perception of what he called the rational soul, the monad that has become transparent to itself. The Vedic tradition described it in terms of the Atman's progressive recognition of its own identity with Brahman, the individual monad gradually recognizing that it is not separate from the universal consciousness, that the boundary between self and cosmos is a surface phenomenon, that the depth of the individual is identical with the depth of everything. The Kabbalistic tradition described it in terms of the progressive ascent through the Sephirot, each level of activation revealing a new dimension of the divine consciousness that the monad is an expression of, each layer peeled back to reveal a deeper layer, until the monad reaches the level of Keter, the crown, the point where individual consciousness and infinite consciousness are recognized as one. And here is what all of these traditions were describing in their different languages with their different frameworks. The activation of the monad is not a single event. It is an ongoing process of deepening, a spiral that goes continuously further from the surface and closer to the core. A progressive revelation in which each layer that is peeled back reveals another layer beneath it, and each new depth becomes the new surface from which the next depth is approached. Which means, the book that finds you when your monad is in its first stage of activation is not the same book that will find you when your monad is in its third stage or its seventh. Each stage of activation has its corresponding wisdom. Each depth of the monad's unfoldment has its corresponding text. This is why the library of the awakening seeker grows in a particular way. Not randomly, not according to intellectual interest or cultural fashion, according to the precise progression of the monad's unfoldment. The books that appear at each stage are exactly the books that the monad at that stage needs. No more, no less. And this is why you may have tried to read certain books before their time and found them opaque, and returned to them later and found them luminous. Not because the book changed, because the monad deepened, because a new layer activated, because the frequency of your consciousness finally reached the frequency the book was transmitting. The book was always there. The wisdom was always available. The transmission was always being sent. But the receiver needed to develop the capacity to receive it. And here is the extraordinary thing. The thing that should fill you with a sense of the vast and precise intelligence that underlies the apparent chaos of your reading life, your intellectual life, your spiritual life. Every book you have ever read has contributed to the development of that capacity. Even the books that didn't seem to teach you anything. Even the books you didn't finish, even the books you read at the wrong time and didn't understand. All of it was part of the progressive development of the monad's coherence. All of it was part of the pre-established harmony working itself out through the particular sequence of your particular life. Nothing was wasted, nothing was accidental. Every layer of reading, every layer of questioning, every layer of seeking has been building toward the moment of activation that is happening now. Because you are here, you are in this transmission, and something in you, the monad that has been quietly building toward coherence through everything that has brought you to this moment, is recognizing something. You feel it, that quality of recognition, that sense that what you are hearing is not new information but remembered truth. That feeling that the words are not entering you from outside but are being spoken from inside, from the depth of you back to the surface of you, that is the monad recognizing itself in the mirror of this transmission. That is the activation. Now let's go to the deepest layer, the layer that everything else has been building toward. Because we have been talking about books, about texts, about wisdom traditions, about quantum mechanics and ancient philosophy and the pre-established harmony of monads. And all of that is real, all of that is true. All of those layers are genuinely there, beneath the surface of what you thought you knew about a book finding you at the right time. But the deepest layer is this. The book is not the point. The book is a mirror. The book is a trigger. The book is a catalyst. But what it is catalyzing, what it is triggering, what it is reflecting, is not something that comes from the book. It comes from you. It was always in you. The monad that is activating was always there, at the center of your being, beneath every layer of conditioning and assumption and surface identity that you have mistaken for yourself. The book finds you not because it contains something you need. The book finds you because it reflects something you already are. The Vedic tradition expressed this with the concept of svadhyaya, self-study. The deepest study is not the study of external texts. It is the study of the self that is doing the reading. Every book you read at the deepest level is a book about you. Every wisdom tradition you encounter is a map of your own interior. Every teaching that lands is landing because it is describing something that is already present in the depth of your own consciousness. The Hermetic tradition expressed this with the principle of correspondence. As above, so below. As within, so without. The wisdom that appears in the outer world, in books, in teachings, in the words of a guide, corresponds to the wisdom that is already present in the inner world, in the monad, in the depth of the self. The outer teaching is not bringing you something from outside. It is showing you something that is already inside, but that you couldn't see until you saw it reflected in the outer. The Sufi tradition expressed this with the teaching that the beloved is not outside the lover. The lover is seeking in the outer world what is already present in the innermost heart. The seeking is necessary, not because the beloved is genuinely outside, but because the seeking is the process through which the lover develops the capacity to recognize what was always already present. You have been seeking. Through books, through teachings, through every transmission that has found you at the right moment. And the seeking has been developing your capacity for recognition. Each book that found you was not bringing you closer to a truth that exists outside you. It was bringing you closer to a recognition of the truth that exists at the center of you. The monad that is activating is not becoming something it wasn't. It is becoming visible to itself. It is peeling back the layers that have obscured it, the layers of conditioning, assumption, surface identity, collective agreement about what is real, and recognizing, in the depth beneath those layers, what it has always been: infinite, irreducible, in pre-established harmony with the consciousness that underlies all of reality. This is the deepest layer, and it is not a layer you can think your way to. It is a layer you can only arrive at by dropping beneath thought, beneath the surface of the thinking mind, into the awareness that is doing the thinking. The monad that is always already there, always already aware, always already in the field of resonance that draws exactly what it needs toward itself. The book that appears when your monad is ready to activate is not arriving from outside the field of your consciousness. It is arising from within it. It is the field of your own deepening awareness generating, in the quantum substrate of reality, where inner and outer are not separate, exactly the reflection it needs to recognize itself more fully. You are not finding the book. You are not finding, the monad is finding itself, using the book as a mirror. And when you understand this, when you feel this, beneath the level of intellectual understanding, in the place where the monad lives, something changes in your relationship with every book you will ever read from this moment forward. You will not read books as a passive recipient of information from outside. You will read them as an active participant in the monad's progressive self-recognition. You will hold a book and feel the field of it, and know that the resonance you feel is not the book speaking to you. It is you speaking to yourself, through the medium of the book, from a depth of yourself that the surface of you hasn't yet reached. And you will understand why certain books have always felt like they were written for you specifically, because in the deepest sense, they were. Not because the author had you in mind, they didn't know you existed, but because the pre-established harmony of monads means that the consciousness that encoded its activation into that text was always in resonance with the consciousness that would receive it. The monad of the writer and the monad of the reader were always, in the deep structure of reality, in conversation. The book is just the medium through which that conversation becomes audible, hidden in plain sight, in every library, in every bookshelf, in every moment when a title catches your eye and something in you pauses before you know why. The conversation has always been happening. You are only now beginning to hear it. I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it rather than answer it quickly. Think of a book that found you, a book that appeared at a moment that, looking back, you can see was not random. A book that arrived when you needed it, before you knew you needed it. A book that changed something, not just in what you knew, but in what you were. What was happening in your life at that moment? What layer of you was in the process of activating? What was shifting beneath the surface of your ordinary days, in the depth of the monad that you are? Because the book that found you was a marker. It was a signpost at the edge of a new territory. It was the universe, the pre-established harmony of all monads, sending you a message in the language of text. You are ready. The next layer is available. The depth you've been approaching is now accessible. And the fact that you are here, in this transmission, at this moment, is the same kind of signpost. Something in you is ready. Something in you has reached a new layer of activation. Something in the depth of the monad that you are has achieved a new level of coherence, and that coherence is generating a field that drew this transmission toward you, or drew you toward this transmission, in a way that felt like choice or accident or recommendation, but was, at the quantum level, the pre-established harmony working itself out through the particular sequence of your particular life. You are here because your monad is ready. And what it is ready for, what this moment of activation is opening, is not just more information, not just another layer of understanding. It is a shift in the level of reality from which you operate, a permanent deepening of the point from which you perceive, the beginning of living, not at the surface of what you are, but from the depth, from the monad itself. And this changes everything. Because when you begin to live from the depth of the monad, rather than the surface of the conditioned self, your relationship with reality changes completely. You no longer experience yourself as a passive recipient of a world that exists independently of your observation. You experience yourself as a participatory consciousness, a monad whose field of awareness is in constant creative interaction with the quantum substrate of reality, generating through the coherence of its own activation the conditions for exactly what it needs to arise. Books find you, teachers find you, opportunities find you, connections find you, not because you are lucky or specially chosen, or because the universe plays favorites, but because the coherence of the activated monad generates a field that reality responds to with precision. Because the pre-established harmony of all monads means that what you are ready for is always in resonance with what is ready for you. The surface version of this is, things work out for people who are in the right mindset. You've heard this. It's not wrong. It's just the thinnest outer layer of what's actually happening. Peel back that understanding and look at what's underneath. What's underneath is not mindset. Mindset is a surface phenomenon. What's underneath is coherence. The quantum coherence of an activated monad generating a field that is in resonance with the deep structure of reality. And that coherence is not achieved by thinking positively, or visualizing outcomes, or any of the surface level practices that have been extracted from the wisdom traditions and sold back to you as self-help techniques. It is achieved by going deeper, by peeling back the layers of the conditioned self until the monad is reached, by allowing the awareness that has been looking outward at the surface of the world to turn inward and look at the depth of itself. By the progressive revelation that every wisdom tradition has been mapping, and that quantum mechanics has been confirming, and that every book that has ever truly found you has been pointing toward. The depth is the practice. Going deeper is the work. Lifting the veil, layer by layer, until what has always been there beneath everything is finally visible. And here is what I want you to know in the deepest layer of this transmission. You have already been doing this work. Everything that has brought you to this moment, every book that found you, every question that wouldn't let you rest, every moment of quiet in which something beneath the surface became briefly perceptible, has been the monad's progressive activation. You have been going deeper for longer than you know. The layers have been peeling back one by one, often without your conscious awareness, in the depth of you where the work happens before the surface mind knows anything about it. And this moment, this transmission, this recognition, this flicker of the monad seeing itself in the mirror of these words, is not the beginning. It is a marker on a path that has been unfolding since before you had language for what was unfolding. The book was always appearing when you were ready. The wisdom was always finding you at the precise moment of your activation. The pre-established harmony was always working itself out through the sequence of your life. You just didn't have a name for what was happening. You didn't have a framework for understanding that the coincidences were not coincidences, that the timing was not accidental, that the field of your deepening consciousness was generating the conditions for exactly what it needed to arise. Now you do. And that name, that framework, is not just intellectual knowledge. It is a tool for going deeper. Because now, when the next book finds you, you will recognize what is happening. You will feel the resonance and know it for what it is. The monad recognizing its corresponding frequency. You will hold the book before you've read a word and know that something in the field of the text is already in conversation with something in the depth of you. And you will read it not as a passive recipient of information, but as a conscious participant in the monad's progressive self-recognition. And that shift in how you read, that shift in the level of consciousness from which you engage with wisdom, will change what you receive. Because the depth at which you engage with a text determines the depth at which the text can reach you. A surface engagement produces surface understanding. A deep engagement, an engagement from the level of the monad, produces transformation. The same book, read from two different depths, is two different books. The surface reader receives information. The deep reader receives activation. You are a deep reader. You have always been. That is why you are here. Let me tell you about a man named Elias. He was a builder, not a philosopher, not a scholar, not someone who moved in circles where words like monad and quantum coherence were spoken. He built things with his hands, structures that stood in the physical world, that could be touched and measured and inhabited. He was good at his work, and he was proud of it, and he had never had much patience for what he called the invisible things. But there was a problem he couldn't build his way out of, a quality of his life that no amount of skill or effort or physical construction could address. A sense which had been growing for years without his permission, that the structures he built on the outside were compensating for something that was missing on the inside. That the solidity he created in the world was an answer to a question he couldn't name. He didn't talk about this. He barely let himself think about it. It was beneath the surface of his life, beneath the work and the routine and the surface identity of a man who built things, and he had learned, or taught himself, to stay at the surface. Until the morning, he found a book in an unusual place. He was clearing out a building that was being demolished. An old structure, one of many he had worked on over the years, being taken down to make way for something new. He was moving through the rooms methodically, as he always did, checking for anything that needed to be addressed before the demolition crew arrived. In a room in the basement, a room that had clearly not been entered in many years, judging by the dust and the state of the air, he found a single book, sitting on a shelf as if it had been placed there deliberately, undamaged by time in a way that seemed improbable given the state of everything around it. He picked it up. He was not a reader. He had no particular interest in whatever this book contained. He picked it up because it was there, and it seemed wrong to leave it. He put it in his coat pocket and went back to work. That evening, sitting in his kitchen after dinner, he took the book out of his pocket and looked at it. He didn't know why. He hadn't planned to. He was going to watch television, as he usually did, and then go to sleep. But something made him open it. He read the first page. He didn't understand all of it. The language was unfamiliar, not in terms of vocabulary, but in terms of the kind of thinking it was describing. It was describing something he had no framework for. But something happened as he read. Something beneath the level of understanding. Something in the depth of him that had been waiting, that had been building towards something for years beneath the surface of the work and the routine and the surface identity, responded. He read for 2 hours. He understood perhaps a third of it. But the third he understood changed something. The question he hadn't been able to name became nameable. The missing thing he had been compensating for with external construction became visible. Not as a wound, not as a failure, but as a depth. As a layer of himself that he had been avoiding because he didn't know how to approach it. He returned to the book over the following weeks. He read it slowly, in the way he worked on a difficult structure, methodically, patiently, going back to sections he didn't understand, and approaching them from different angles until they yielded. And gradually, layer by layer, the book opened. And as the book opened, something in Elias opened with it. Not dramatically, not in a way that anyone around him would have noticed immediately, but in the depth of him, in the place where the monad lives, something was activating. Something was achieving coherence that had been incoherent. Something was becoming visible that had been hidden beneath the surface of a life lived in the physical world, building things that stood and could be measured. He didn't stop being a builder, but he became a different kind of builder, because now he understood that the structures he built on the outside were not separate from the structure of his own consciousness, that the precision and care he brought to physical construction could be brought with equal precision and care to the construction of the interior, that the monad at the center of his being was itself a kind of structure, one that could be built toward layer by layer with the same patience and skill he brought to everything he built. The book found him in a basement that was about to be demolished. At the precise moment when the life he had built on the surface was ready to be taken down, and something deeper was ready to be revealed beneath it. That is not coincidence. That is the pre-established harmony of monads, working itself out through the particular sequence of one man's particular life. And you have your own version of this story, your own book in a basement, your own moment when something found you at the precise moment you were ready, in a way that felt like accident, but was, in the depth of it, inevitable. The question is not whether this has happened to you. It has. The question is whether you are ready to recognize it for what it was, and whether you are ready to recognize what is happening right now, because this is a moment of activation. This transmission, these words, this frequency, this field, is finding you at a precise moment. Not because you stumbled here accidentally, because the monad that you are has reached a level of coherence that drew this transmission toward you, because the pre-established harmony of your particular consciousness and this particular field of wisdom has been building toward this moment through everything that has brought you here. You are ready. That's why you're here. And what you do with that readiness, how you respond to this moment of activation, will determine the next layer of the monad's unfoldment. Because the activation is not a passive event, it requires your participation. It requires the conscious choice to go deeper rather than returning to the surface, to continue peeling back the layers rather than stopping at the one that was just revealed. The monad activates through your willingness to look deeper, through your choice to engage with what is beneath the surface rather than staying comfortable at the level you already know, through your decision in each moment to be a depth seeker rather than a surface dweller. And the books that find you, the transmissions that arrive at precisely the right moment, are the universe's way of confirming that you are on the path, that the depth you've been approaching is now accessible, that the next layer is ready to be revealed. Trust the books that find you, not blindly. The monad has its own discernment, and you will feel the difference between a transmission that resonates with your depth and one that is simply stimulating your surface. But when the resonance is real, when the field of a text meets the field of your awakening consciousness, and something happens that is deeper than intellectual understanding, trust it, follow it, let it take you deeper than you've been, because that is what you are here for, not to accumulate surface knowledge, not to build an impressive architecture of intellectual understanding, to go deeper, to peel back layer after layer of what you've been told is real, until you reach the layer where reality actually lives. To activate the monad, your irreducible point of pure consciousness, until it is fully coherent, fully luminous, fully transparent to itself. That is the path. And every book that finds you is a step on it. Now, I want to ask you to do something in this moment. Something simple but not small. In the comments below, share the book that found you, the one that appeared at the right moment, the one whose timing, looking back, you can see was not accidental, the one that changed something, not just in what you knew, but in what you were. Share it. Because the community that gathers in this space is a community of depth seekers. People who refuse to stop at the surface. People whose monads are in various stages of activation, all moving toward coherence, all drawing toward themselves exactly what they need through the pre-established harmony of their awakening consciousness. And your book, the one that found you, may be exactly what someone else's monad is ready to receive. Your sharing may be the mechanism through which the pre-established harmony works itself out for someone else in this community. Your transmission may be the book that finds them. Type the title. Share what shifted. Tell us what layer of you was activated when it arrived. And if you want to add one more thing, tell us what you are sensing is the next book, the one that hasn't quite found you yet, but that you can feel approaching, the one that the current level of your monad's activation is drawing toward you, the one that is in the field, in resonance with your deepening consciousness, waiting for the moment of coherence that will make the connection perceptible. Because that book is coming. The pre-established harmony is already working. The field is already in motion. And when it arrives, when you pick it up and feel the recognition before you've read a word, you will know what is happening. You will know it is not coincidence. You will know it is the monad, in its progressive activation, drawing toward itself exactly what it needs to take its next step. And you will read it from the depth, from the level of the monad itself. And what you receive will not be information, it will be activation. Here is what I want you to carry from this transmission, not as a belief, as a living understanding, a framework that changes how you move through the world. Reality is layered. The surface of what you see is the thinnest outer layer of what exists. Beneath the visible world lies a quantum field of probability and potential that does not recognize the separation between observer and observed. Beneath that field lies the pre-established harmony of all monads, the deep resonance between all points of consciousness that is built into the structure of reality itself. And beneath that lies the monad, your irreducible point of pure awareness, which is not separate from the consciousness that underlies everything, but is a unique expression of it, reflecting the entire universe from its own particular perspective. This monad activates progressively. It achieves coherence through the process of going deeper, of peeling back layer after layer of surface conditioning and assumption and collective agreement about what is real, until the depth of what you actually are becomes visible. And as it activates, as it achieves coherence, it generates a field that reality responds to with precision. Books find you. Wisdom finds you. What you need finds you. Not because you are lucky or specially chosen, but because the coherent field of an activated monad is in resonance with the pre-established harmony of the wisdom it needs. And that resonance collapses the quantum probability of the book's appearance in your life from possible to actual. The book appears because the monad is ready, and the monad is ready because you have been going deeper, because you have been refusing to stop at the surface, because something in you, the monad itself, has been pulling you toward depth since before you had words for what was pulling you. Everything that has brought you to this moment has been part of the activation. Every book that found you, every question that wouldn't let you rest, every moment of quiet recognition, every transmission that landed in the depth rather than the surface, all of it has been the monad's progressive unfoldment, working itself out through the particular sequence of your particular life. And this moment is part of it. This transmission is part of it. The recognition you are feeling right now, the sense that what you are hearing is not new but remembered, not received from outside but spoken from inside, is the monad recognizing itself in the mirror of these words. That recognition is the activation, and it cannot be unfelt. What has been revealed cannot be re-hidden. The layer that has been peeled back does not close again. You have seen beneath the surface of what you thought you knew about books, about consciousness, about the way wisdom finds you at the right moment. You have seen the quantum mechanism beneath the coincidence, the ancient wisdom beneath the quantum mechanism, the pre-established harmony beneath the ancient wisdom, and the monad itself at the center of it all, irreducible, luminous, in perfect resonance with the consciousness that underlies everything. You are no longer a surface dweller. You see the depth now, And from this depth, everything looks different. Every book you have ever read looks different. Every moment of recognition you have ever felt looks different. Every coincidence, every synchronicity, every moment when something found you at exactly the right time looks different. They were not coincidences. They were the monad in its progressive activation, drawing toward itself exactly what it needed. They were the pre-established harmony of reality, working itself out through the particular sequence of your particular life. They were the universe, which is not separate from the consciousness that you are, responding to the coherent field of your deepening awareness with precisely calibrated reflections. And now you know this, not as a belief, as a recognition. And that recognition will change how you move through the world. You will hold books differently. You will notice the moment when a title catches your eye with a quality of attention that is different from ordinary attention. You will feel the field of a text before you've read a word and know what that feeling is. You will recognize the moments of activation in yourself and in others, and understand what is happening beneath the surface of those moments. You will be a depth seeker, a veil lifter, someone who refuses to stop at the surface explanation, who always looks for the layer beneath, who knows that the most important truths are not hidden from you, but hidden in plain sight, beneath the layer you're currently looking at. And the books will keep finding you, because the monad keeps activating, because the depth keeps deepening, because the pre-established harmony keeps working itself out through the sequence of your life, drawing toward you exactly what you need at exactly the moment you are ready for it. There is always another layer. There is always a deeper depth. There is always a new veil to lift. And beneath the last veil, beneath the deepest layer, there is not something foreign or frightening or incomprehensible. There is you, the monad, pure awareness, in perfect resonance with the consciousness that underlies everything. That has always been there, waiting for your awareness to look deep enough to see it. The veil is thinner than you think, and now you can see through it. Welcome to what was always beneath everything. If this transmission found you at the right moment, consider returning to it during a quiet morning before the surface noise of the day begins, or in the stillness before sleep when the deeper layers are most accessible. That is when these words will reach a different depth in you than they did the first time. And if someone in your life is sensing that there is more beneath the surface, but hasn't yet found the language for what they're feeling, share this with them. When you give someone access to a layer they could sense but couldn't reach alone, the veil lifts for both of you simultaneously. Your own coherence deepens in the act of extending the field outward. There is a layer beneath this transmission that connects directly to something you may already be sensing about the nature of reality itself. Not just how wisdom finds you, but what exists at the 0 point beneath all of it. The hidden field that generates everything before anything becomes visible. That is exactly what the video on the 0 point is not what you think goes into. The field beneath the quantum field, the layer beneath the layer, the substrate where the monad's resonance originates before it surfaces as the book that finds you.